First off the bat, welcome everyone to today's workshops, which is Board Member Bootcamp. Recording, as you probably already heard, we will be recording this session along with today's presentation. The reason being that after this presentation, we will be sharing the recording along with the PowerPoint and any other handouts that are pertinent to this webinar. My name is Yvette Bello. I am representing the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. With me today to make this a great experience is Betsy Johnson and Monica Kelly of the Hartford Foundation, and our gracious co-host, Daniel Alexander from the Hartford Public Library. This workshop is brought to you by a partnership between the Hartford Foundation and the Hartford Public Library. We do want to know who you are, so again, take a moment, add your name and your name of your organization in the chat. We'd love to hear who's in the room. And in terms of questions, we've been in this Zoom environment for quite a while now, but it bears repeating. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat. I will be monitoring that chat, and so I can lift any questions for the presenter, at any time when she asks for them, and we'll do our best to answer those questions as we can. We will have a 5-minute break or so around 1 p.m. So but as always, if you need one, please take one. There will be a survey, which we'll send a link in the chat towards the end of the session. Feel free to drop some comments and some suggestions and let us know how we can improve or keep training relevant for you. Before I introduce my presenter, we'd like to do a quick poll. Daniel, if you can cue that up. We'd like to know who's in the room in terms of roles. The good thing about this session and this series is that it's open to everyone, but just to get a sense of who's in the room, whether you're a board member, an executive director or CEO, or someone who's acting in that capacity. If you're a staff member or volunteer. I know some of us have multiple hats, so pick the one that's most present for you today, and one that you'll be listening as. Just helpful for us to kind of get a sense of who's our audience. It looks like we have 18 of 24. Just take a moment and choose an identity. Great, a little bit longer. We're almost there, 1 of 25. Looks like there's a lot of board members. It's awesome. You are in the right room. I don't know if you remember that from school, and they're like, if you're in, this is the so-and-so class, if it's not you, you're in the wrong class. Back in the day when we were in person. Awesome. So it looks like a lot of board members. Okay. I'm going to end that poll, or do you, Daniel? I don't even know. Okay. Looks like the majority of us here in the room are board members, so that's great. You are in the right room. So let me introduce our presenter. Join me in welcoming May Maloney. She's a repeat presenter here. Fabulous person, a real person. She's also senior program director with Leadership Greater Hartford. As a part of her role at Leadership Greater Hartford, May manages the Leaders on Board program, which, if you haven't heard of it, really connects individuals to nonprofits in need of new board members. She also manages the Quest program, which is, she's not just manages it, but she's also a graduate of it. Quest is a leadership program for high potential emerging leaders from the business and nonprofit sectors. May regularly conducts workshops on leadership development and nonprofit governance. She's really our go-to on that. Throughout her tenure at Leadership Greater Hartford, she's implemented after-school programs at Hartford High School, has a dog, has developed summer youth leadership programs for teens throughout the Greater Hartford region, and organized numerous community service projects throughout the capital city. May's background in the nonprofit arena and in training. Also, she's a social worker by training. Really has prepared her for several areas, including program development and community organizing. So I know I'm cutting this short because I love your intro so much better, May. But without further ado, I present May Maloney.
Well,
Welcome.
thank you so much, Yvette. Real person, real dog. She likes to alert us whenever there's a delivery, which seems to happen a lot these days. So my apologies in advance if she makes a repeat bark. But thank you so much, Yvette. Thank you to everyone for hopping on today. Thank you for inviting me, Hartford Foundation, and the Hartford Public Library. I'm excited to spend the next hour and a half talking about board governance, thinking about what has worked in your boards, where you think you have. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, did you hear my intro? I just suddenly got a notification I was muted.
Yeah. No, just a little
Okay,
tail end missing, but that's
okay.
okay.
Well, I'm excited. That's all I was saying. So thank you for that. Perfect. So as Yvette said, we've all spent more time in virtual meetings than I think any of us would have ever imagined. 21 months into this pandemic, here we are. But just to ground us and remind us, if you're in a position to do so, we'd love to see you. So turn your camera on if you are having your lunch or are just completely Zoom fatigued. It's fine to leave your camera off. We'll ask that you stay muted, just in case your dog also likes to bark when the UPS delivery people come. Thank you for that. Feel free to throw your questions into the chat. As Yvette said, she will be monitoring that and surfacing those as they come through. Oops. We will have a formal break about 1 o'clock, but as always, feel free to eat your lunch and move around as you need to. So welcome again. Yvette did share some of this, but I just want to underscore that I work with Leadership Greater Hartford, LGH. We are a nonprofit organization. We have a wonderful board, and I've learned a lot from our own board. We have leadership development programs for teens, high school students, emerging leaders, seasoned leaders, community members, retirees. Our hope is to really help build leadership skills while building community. And one way that we do that is through our Leaders on Board program. So we train people who are interested in serving on nonprofit boards, and then we help them find nonprofits in the community that are looking for new board members. So I often joke that America runs on Duncan, but nonprofits run on volunteers. We all recognize that nonprofits need volunteers both to help with programs, but also to serve as board members. So we have placed over 860 people on 165 different nonprofit boards since this program started. We're very fortunate to be supported by the Hartford Foundation, and we thank them for their continued support. So Yvette provided a bit of an intro, but here is my life in photos and I guess logos. Here's a picture of my dog that you've all now heard. I have been at Leadership Greater Hartford for about a dozen years, which just seems crazy. I have a master's in social work. I have a 6-year-old little boy. We did kindergarten from home last year, which was bananas. I am so glad that he is back in school this year. I think I'm not sure who's more excited, me or him, but I'm very excited. We adopted 3 kittens during the pandemic, which I will tell you is too many kittens. That's just a lot of cats. So you may not only hear a dog bark, but you might see a cat run through the screen. That's just where we are right now. Because of my role with Leaders on Board, I have the opportunity to meet with a whole bunch of different nonprofits in the community, and I've fallen in love with many of them. So I'm currently serving on 3 boards. I've served on others in the past, and we'll try to draw on some of these experiences to underscore and highlight a bit of what we're going to be talking about today. So today we're going to talk about the nonprofit sector. We're going to talk about what makes a nonprofit, how it is similar, how it is different from for-profit businesses. We're going to talk about the 10 basic responsibilities that nonprofit boards share. We'll also talk about the nuanced and distinct differences between the full board's responsibility and your individual responsibility as a board member. We'll talk a bit about the difference between your role as a board member and a staff member. That can be murky. And then if there's time, we're going to have some scenarios, some examples of common challenges that face boards. And based on what we've discussed today, how would you address that challenge? So we have a tight agenda. We will take a break at about 1, and let's dig in. Before we do, if you haven't already done so, we would love to hear from you, your name, your organization, if there's anything specific that you would like to learn today. And just because I'm out of ideas, what is your favorite quarantine activity? I worry that it's going to be a long winter with Omicron. So if you have a favorite activity, please throw it in the chat. All right, friends. So what is a nonprofit? How is a nonprofit defined? What separates nonprofits from for-profit businesses? Here's some sort of formal definitions. There's a lot of components to a nonprofit. So groups that are tax exempt under the International Revenue Code, 501c3, are public charities because they're formed to provide a public benefit. Sure. A non-governmental organization established for purposes other than profit making. Sure. What does all that mean? So I think there are really 4 components when we think about nonprofits. The first is around the mission of an organization. There's a social benefit. At the core, a nonprofit has a mission, has a reason, has an issue that they are trying to address. The mission will guide everything that the organization is working to do. Nonprofits are not owned, not by the executive director, not by the founder, not by the board. Unlike a traditional for-profit business where there is one single owner or the board may own the organization, nonprofits are owned by the community, right? So even if there's a founder or an executive director, they steward and shepherd and guide the organization, but they don't own the organization. I think that's important to remember. It's also important to recognize that nonprofits are tax exempt. They don't pay property taxes. And this is because they relieve government burden in some way. And so the government wants to offer an incentive, a support to the nonprofits who are doing really critical work. In a city like Hartford, which is only 17 and a half square miles, half of our city is owned by nonprofits. When you think about hospitals, schools, parks, charities. So there's an unintended consequence for nonprofits to not pay property taxes. A small city like Hartford has some challenges, as we all know. And the other piece that I think is important to remember is that nonprofits do need money to operate. They do need the financial resources to carry out their mission, to provide the programs, to enhance their services. What separates nonprofits from for-profits is nonprofit profits, the profits at the end of the year will go back into the organization to help strengthen and grow and expand the programs and services. There's no payout to shareholders, and there's no payout to board members. Everything comes back into the organization to grow and strengthen. I work with a lot of young people, and they'll say, "Oh, miss, you work for a nonprofit. That must mean there's no money." Well, there's probably not enough money, but organizations do need the financial resources to carry out its mission, as I'm sure you are well acquainted with. I think this is an interesting slide because it's just a snapshot of nonprofits in Connecticut. And these numbers are from 2018. So I suspect these numbers are going to look very different post-pandemic. I think some nonprofits have had to close. Others have formed to address the needs of our communities given living through a pandemic, a long pandemic. Organizations have merged. Organizations have shifted to respond to the needs of our community. But as of 2018, there were about 12,000 of those 501c3 public charities, the organizations that we've just defined. That is a tremendously large number when you think about our small state of Connecticut. And all of these organizations do important work. They feed the hungry, they clothe the homeless, they educate our children, they protect our green spaces, they enhance the arts and cultural fabric of our communities. Each of them require strong board members, folks who are talented, who are thoughtful, who are passionate about the work that is being done. So I always think it's helpful to orient ourselves around nonprofit life cycles. And so I encourage you, as I'm going through this particular slide, to think about where you think your organization fits in this life cycle. Some organizations are in what we would call a startup phase. These are generally grassroots ideas, and these are folks that maybe just acquired a 501c3. There might be some limited funding. These organizations are typically led by content experts. The board is generally friends, family members, colleagues. In this stage, there's often more work than people. As you grow into your adolescence, into maturity, you're hitting your stride. There is a period of growth. Your processes formalize. You will be able to focus more on strategic planning, on formalizing your governance practices, your capacity building. Are you in a period of stagnation or in decline? Your organization perhaps has lost connection to clients. You've lost some sort of funding streams. Your growth is hindered. I encourage you to think about what type of new board members do you need to help you maintain the maturity or return to maturity. If you find that you are in a startup organization and that you're just sort of building this idea, who are the innovators? Who are the entrepreneurs that you can bring on the board to help you increase the footprint and the impact of your organization? If you're in a period of decline, who are the folks in your network, in your sphere, in your community who can challenge the process and inspire and invigorate and motivate the organization to try new things so that you'll be moved into a period of renewal? Sometimes folks, when they think about their nonprofit life cycle, they can think about it in a rather narrow way, meaning that if their organization has been around for a long time, they automatically think that they are going to be in this maturation stage. That's not necessarily true. There are a lot of organizations that have been in existence for years and years, but are probably still sort of in a growth pattern. There's other organizations that are maybe newer, and quickly grow and quickly mature, right? So don't just think about your timeline as you think about where you are in your life cycle. Knowing where you are in your life cycle can help level set some expectations. It can give you a frame of reference that helps level set your expectations. It can guide conversations. It can inform strategic decisions. It can help you think about who you want on your boards, what kind of leadership you're looking for, what kinds of skills you want to bring on. So I encourage you to take this into your boardrooms and think about where you are in your life cycle. So simply put, nonprofit boards are a group of volunteers who come together periodically to discuss the health and the vitality of an organization. And this is a different kind of volunteer experience than building a home with Habitat for Humanity or passing out a bottle of water at the 5K. Those are absolutely important and critical ways to support nonprofits and to support our community. Serving on a board is just a little bit different. It's more about leadership. It's about decision making, strategic thinking, building consensus, finding a way forward. It's, I think, also important to recognize that some nonprofits have paid staff and some don't. I suspect some people on this call do not have paid staff in their organizations, which means that not only will you be wearing the governance hat, which is what we're going to spend most of the time talking about today, you also need to be doing the day-to-day operations of the organization. And so I currently serve on a board. We're an education foundation. We provide grant dollars for teachers doing innovative work in the classrooms. Excuse me, my dog's gonna bark. Hang on one second. Got her. Thank you. Yeah, so our education foundation, not only do we fundraise and do sort of the governance, making sure we're following the bylaws and all of that, we also are the ones to open up the mail, deposit the checks, write the thank you notes, plan the gala, right? So know that there are certain things that each board member is responsible for. That is true across all boards, and then there are some boards that would require even more work because there is no paid staff to do it. So the bulk of this presentation is based on this tool from BoardSource. If you're not already connected to BoardSource, I highly encourage you to get a membership. A lot of their resources are free. You can download templates and tools, but if you get a membership, you're able to access a lot of webinars. They have great publications for boards, and this is one of their publications. So it's the 10 responsibilities of nonprofit boards. And none of these responsibilities are rocket science, but they do require nuanced thinking. They require you to pay attention, to think strategically, to reflect, to ask questions. So we're going to dig into these 10 and talk about them in some detail. So the first is to determine the mission and the purpose of the organization and to advocate for them. So obviously that sounds like a no-brainer, but I can't tell you how often I talk to board members who will say things like, well, we're a group of nice people and we help kids and we do good stuff. Well, great. How many other organizations are full of good people, help kids, and do good stuff, right? What separates your organization from every other? What is it that your organization does tremendously well? If the organization was to be wiped off the face of the earth forever, what is the hole that would be left behind? What are the communities? Who are the people? What are the places that would be impacted by that loss? Several years ago, BoardSource did a survey of executive directors of small grassroots organizations and huge nonprofits and everything in between. And they said, what is the most important thing that a nonprofit board member can bring with them, right? What skill, what attribute, what are you looking for? Off the charts, passion for mission ranked the highest. If you are passionate and understand the importance of the mission of the work, you are an exceptional board member. Everything else that you bring, all of your lived experiences, your professional background, education that you may have had, all of that infuses you as a board member. But if you're passionate, if you're excited, and you understand the mission, you are an exceptional board member. So we encourage you to review the mission and make sure that it's still relevant. How has the world changed? How can your organization pivot to address the needs of the community? Where we're located in Hartford, when I'm not talking to you from my living room, when we are in the office, we are located in an area that had been predominantly Portuguese. Now it's predominantly Puerto Rican and West Indian. How have the needs of the community changed? How have the nonprofits in our community responded to those changes in our community? Is your mission still relevant? And we're going to talk about this again and again, but ensure that your mission guides your planning. Your mission has to be central in everything that you choose to do on behalf of the organization. If you feel like your organization is pivoting away too far from the original mission, you are in violation of one of the key responsibilities of being a board member, mission creep, right? If you are a mentoring organization and you know that the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving has a grant for, adopting out kittens or something, you may feel like, hey, we can kind of like move over there and start doing the kitten thing, right? But that would be in violation of your mission. So mission, core, central, and needs to be paid attention to. You're also responsible for selecting and hiring your chief executive, your executive director. So I know that probably not everyone on this call is part of an organization that has a chief executive or has an executive director. If you do, or if you're in a position to hire, know that you are that person's boss. So you want to think very thoughtfully around who you want that person to be, right? What are the skill sets that you want that individual to have? Do you want them to be strong in program design, fundraising, networking, all of those things, right? Who can you envision kind of piloting or steering the ship? A lot of our executive leaders are retiring. And so our boards need to be thinking about who can grow this organization in new ways. Our president and CEO of 35 years retired last year, and our board had to think very thoughtfully around who that next leader can be. How can they build on everything that he had done, all of his institutional knowledge, and move the organization into new and exciting directions? So be thinking about who you want that person to be, because you are also responsible for supporting and evaluating that person. I once served on a board where we provided permanent and supportive housing for people living with HIV and AIDS. And our executive director had been in his role since 1989, and he had never received a performance review. So he didn't know if the board was even paying attention to what he was doing. Did we appreciate his efforts? Were there things that we thought he could do to improve? Right? It's absolutely critical that you provide that feedback to your executive director. What can you do to support them? How can you leverage relationships that you have to help and support your executive director? Be sure to tie their performance goals to your strategic plan, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But be sure that there is a yearly assessment, excuse me, that is provided to your executive director. This needs to be a way for that individual leader to grow. Strong boards keep good leadership in place. So to the extent that you can provide constructive feedback, thank them for the hard work that they're doing. Being an executive director is not easy, particularly now. So let them know the things that you celebrate about their leadership, about how hard they've worked, about different ideas that they've had. And if there are ways for you to support their growth, please do. Do you have a strategic plan? Have you seen it? Through the planning process, the board and staff translates the mission into goals and objectives that are used to focus energy and resources. The board is ultimately responsible for participating in and approving of decisions that will set and guide your direction. So your strategic plan is your guide over time, and your participation is important so that you can be on board. Your focus has to be on the overall impact and interest of the organization. So progress reports should update the board on where things are in relation to the strategic plan. You can look at a need to retire a program, or if there needs to be a creation of a new one. I suspect that many strategic plans were modified over the last couple of years. I don't think anyone's strategic plans in 2019 envisioned COVID. So rework your strategic plan. There's nothing worse than investing a ton of your time and talent and resources and energy into a strategic plan that just lives on a shelf, right? So bring your strategic plan into your boardrooms, look at it, digest it, talk about it, edit it as needed so that it becomes a path forward for your organization that the board, the staff can be a part of. You want to also pay attention to your programs. Do they align with your mission? Know again what your signature programs are and why. What is the impact? How do you know if you're being successful? What is it that you need to know as a board member to confirm that your programs are effective, that you're meeting your goals? Are you looking at health indicators? Are you looking at attendance? Are you looking at grades? Right? It's going to depend on the kind of organization that you're with. But as a board, know what metrics you want to pay attention to so that you know if you are hitting the mark. How do you know if you're making a difference? How do you know if you're achieving your mission? One way that you can do this is through a dashboard. Some of you may have this, some of you may not. A dashboard is simply like the dashboard of your car. It's a quick snapshot that you can share with your board. How's the gas? Are you running low? Do you need a top up? It's benchmark data that very quickly can give you a sense of how the organization is doing. These are just sort of sample questions. It can be around finances, it can be around programs, it can be around whatever it is that's helpful to your board. The metrics are going to look different depending on every organization, but I would encourage you to think about creating something like this so that at a quick snapshot you can see the health and vitality of your organization when you're having a board meeting. Let me stop here. Does anyone have any questions? I feel like I'm moving through this quickly. Yvette, do you see anything?
Yeah, so we just have a couple of comments. Definitely, when we get a chance, May, to review the chat for those activities on what to do during quarantine. Some of them sound great. Just kudos, if you will, on, I'm going to start from the sort of most recent. So snapshot of the dashboard, just kudos on that idea from Deanne. Let's see. Some just want to express that of what they want to get out of the session, just understanding how to be a good board member, learn the role, how Falguni can help. And again, another COVID activity of learning of themselves. Just kudos again on the mission side, just sort of grounding it there first and it being a critical step to do so, finding it very helpful. Others just hoping as a new board member how to work with an established board and a long-standing board. In terms of questions, Mark is asking how we can get one of these dashboards. So that's sort of a resource question from your slide. And Amy, just to your question, yes, slides will be shared at the after this session, along with a link to the recording of the session.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I
no worries.
Really struggle keeping up with the chat and trying to talk at the same time. So I really appreciate that.
No, don't. I got you, May.
Thank you. So the question was around how can you get one of these dashboards? You can lift the one from this presentation and modify it based on your own needs, or you can do a simple Google search. There's a bunch that you can just find, quick templates. BoardSource has some as well. I find it just really helpful. I'm sort of a visual learner. So it's just helpful. A quick snapshot of how the organization is doing. Just know as a board what indicators you want to have represented here. Thanks for the good questions. So the sixth responsibility is around ensuring the organization has the financial resources it needs to carry out its mission. And this is really a constellation of concepts. An organization can only be as effective if it has the resources it needs to carry out its mission. While much should be expected of an executive director or any development staff, if you're fortunate enough to have those folks, the board is ultimately responsible for ensuring the organization has the necessary funds. So there are a lot of ways that organizations can get money. Government grants, fee-for-service, individual contributions. Know where the money is coming from and know where the money is coming from. Let me just pause there for now. What Caesar funds, Caesar can unfund. So again, the same organization that I was talking about earlier, we provided permanent and supportive housing for folks living with HIV and AIDS. My very first month on the board, we lost one federal grant and we lost like 65% of our funding. And so suddenly our clients, the 102 people who lived in this community, we had to figure out how were we going to support them, what was going to happen. Our board hadn't been doing a good enough job diversifying those streams of funding. So when one grant is taken away, we had a massive hole, and we really struggled in trying to make up that loss, right? So pay attention to where the resources are coming from and do your part. So being a board member is a privilege. It is also a responsibility. So you are asked to give your time, you're asked to give your talent, but also we encourage you to give of your treasure. So I encourage you to think, does your board have an existing policy asking board members for yearly donations? If not, I would encourage you to think about instituting a policy like that. Leading by personal philanthropy, modeling the way as a chief steward, as the people who raise their hand and say, I am so excited about this organization that I want to be on their board. Hopefully you want to give of your of some financial resources. But to have a policy in place can be very, very helpful, partly because it can level set expectations. So some boards will say we want every board member to contribute $100 for the year. Others are going to say we would like to be in your top 3 charities. Or you can give or get. We have $1,000 expectation, but if you get 10 of your friends to give $100, great. Know what that expectation is so that there's no confusion. One of the challenges that we have in our Leaders on Board program, historically, was that folks would be trained and then matched with a nonprofit, and they would fall in love with this nonprofit and be so excited to be on their board, and then come to the board meeting and they would find out that there's a $5,000 expectation, and then be like, what? I can't do that, right? So as you're soliciting new board members, talk about what that expectation is so they know what is expected of them. Sometimes organizations, I was just talking to a group yesterday where their board chair was saying, well, we ask a lot of our board, they give a lot of time, they work really hard, we feel bad asking them for money. And I hear that, I recognize, I understand. I also will challenge that by saying, if you are a board member, it is your duty to lead by example, and personal philanthropy is part of that. I keep picking on the same board, but again, that same group where we provided permanent and supportive housing for folks living with HIV and AIDS. When we wanted to bring on some new board members, we were thinking about the fact that there was not a single person from the community that we served on our board. What a missed opportunity. How can we be experts in their lives? What is it like to live in these buildings, right? We sort of could guess, but how would we really know? And when we dug a little deeper and we found out why folks were not serving on the board, one of the reasons was that the financial contribution expectation just didn't make sense. A lot of these folks were unemployed, they were on disability, some were sick, and so they couldn't contribute a tremendous amount of money. So we reworked our bylaws. So it said we want every board member to contribute something meaningful to them. And that is different for every single person. So if it's $10 for the year or if it's $100 for the year, it is significant to them. And that opened up an opportunity for people to come and serve on the board and offer their experience, their lens, their perspective, their talent, their skill in service of this board. So here is a pie chart of nonprofit revenue across the sector. And as we've said, income comes from many places. There's government grants, there's fee for service. Let's dive into the private contributions. This is a philanthropic pie. And what this shows us is that your network is super important. So let's look at individuals and bequests. So bequest being money that is left upon someone's passing. If you add those two together, that's like 80%, right? That's huge. In 2017, Giving Tuesday saw $274 million donated in one day. I'm really curious to see what the 2021 numbers are. Who you know is super important. Somebody who's donated to your organization in the past is the most likely person to donate again. When we're in person, I'll always ask, how many people love fundraising? And no one raises their hand, including me, right? But I think fundraising is an opportunity to build relationships. And so if you can replace the word fundraising with relationship building, it can change the way you think about it. When I've historically thought about fundraising, I think about cold calls, I think about making an ask, I think about uncomfortable conversations, when in reality, fundraising, building relationships is a cycle, right? So who in your life can you introduce to the organization? How can you get them connected to fall in love with the work that's being done? How can you help them recognize that they have an integral role in furthering the organization's mission and impacting the work that's being done? How can you thank them for what they have contributed and help them see that their dollars have great value? At Leadership Greater Hartford, every end of the calendar year, we give our board members a list of people who've donated, and we ask each board member to call maybe 10 people and say thank you so much because of your contribution. We were able to do these things. We just want to thank you. Your contributions have really helped us. And I got to tell you, more often than not, people are so excited to get a phone call thanking them. They're more likely to donate again because they feel part of the solution. They recognize that they have value, that they have contributed to something meaningful, and that without them, the organization wouldn't be able to continue. So building relationships, letting people know how their contributions matter, thanking them, keeping those relationships going so that when it's time for another ask, it's not coming out of the blue. It's not an awkward conversation. It's a, hey, this is how you've contributed to us in the past. This is how it's been meaningful and useful. This is the impact that you've made. Are you interested in impacting us again? Right? So again, I encourage you to think about replacing the word fundraising with relationship building, because ultimately a huge percentage of who gives to our nonprofits are people that we know. So let's cultivate those relationships and remind them that without them, our organizations are not nearly as strong or as robust. The seventh responsibility is around protecting your assets and financial oversight of the organization. And this is really conscientious oversight. This responsibility reminds us that the board must review and approve budgets. It must look to how the organization generates and spends income. You want to be sure that there are financial systems in place. You want to look to see a quarterly financial statement just so you have a sense if you're on track, if the budget was way off, right? How many organizations canceled their galas, their fundraisers in 2020 and into 2021? There's going to be holes. How can those holes be addressed and made up? Look for balance sheets, right? I gotta tell you, so my background is in social work. I went about as far away from numbers as I possibly could. It took me a really long time to learn how to read a budget. I suspect many of you on this call are much more comfortable with balance sheets and budgets than I have been. If you're like me, and that is something that is not second nature to you, ask questions. Right? If something doesn't make sense to you, ask questions. Be sure that there are certain financial systems in place. So, for example, a simple example is the person who opens up the mail with the check should not be the person to deposit the check, right? There needs to be two sets of eyes just to be sure that everything is above board. Be sure that an annual audit, a 990, is filed. Smaller organizations with budgets of under $50,000 don't need to do an audit, but they do need to do something called a compilation, right? So be sure that those things are happening. Here's like a sample budget. Yours may look similar to this or not, but review it. Look to see how your projections track. How does income track with expenses? How did COVID impact your planning? It's about reasonable due diligence. Ask questions. The eighth responsibility is around building a competent board. And oftentimes we'll think that it's the executive director or board chair who goes out to their network and circle of friends and taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, there's an open board seat, come join us. Certainly that does happen, but we want to have a diverse board. We want to have diversity in terms of skill set, for sure. If you're an arts organization, we hope that your boards certainly have artists on the board, but also people from accounting, from marketing, who have a legal background, because it is through those diverse and different perspectives that your board is comprehensive and complete. We want to have a racially diverse board. Particularly for small nonprofits, diversity ensures that your board doesn't come from the same pool of contacts. Again, it will foster vibrant representations of the communities that you serve. Racial diversity is particularly important as the decision making at the highest level leadership boards play a critical role in creating an organization that prioritizes and supports and invests in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as stewards of the public good, nonprofits should remember that those who comprise our boards are a reflection of our organization's values and beliefs. Diverse viewpoints that come from different lived experiences and cultural backgrounds strengthen board deliberations and decision making. And effective boards should work to build a culture of trust and candor, none of which is possible without a culture of inclusion, encouraging all board members to bring their perspectives and identities into the room. So think about who is not in the room. I mentioned earlier that we didn't have a single person who was living in the supportive housing unit on our boards. What a missed opportunity. What other individuals are missing? I'm, again, serving on a board now. We're an education foundation. And I am the only one on the board with a school-aged child. Everyone else on the board has kids that have gone through the school system. Some folks on the board have really great historical knowledge. They know a lot of people in town. They know a lot of key players in the education system. But they were really curious in having someone from the school now, right? Someone who was a parent of a kindergartner doing remote learning during COVID, right? They didn't have anyone from the community on the board. So I can only offer my lens, my perspective, but it's a way to bring my community into the boardroom. I'll also share that I encourage you to think about people as holistic human beings rather than just what is on a resume. So it is through our whole lived experiences that we enter into a boardroom. A few months ago, I was on a call with a woman who had been a stay-at-home mom for a number of years, and she was saying, I'd love to be a board member, but I don't really think I have any skills. And I was like, hold the phone. Like, you have all of the skills. Like, let's just talk about all of the things that you bring, right? So in addition to thinking about people's educational or professional backgrounds, which, yes, are super important, think about lived experiences. Where do people reside, right? If you are a Hartford-based nonprofit, hopefully you have Hartford residents on your board. Hopefully you have suburban residents also on your board, right? You want to diversify in as many ways as possible. So you may want to use what we call a matrix, where you can list out all of the skills, all of the backgrounds that you want to have on the board, that you feel would make your board robust. And then go through and see what skills and attributes you already have and what is missing. There's really great templates that you can download online and modify for your own organization. But think about who is missing, who could take your seat, what skills, what perspectives are absent. And then also, I think it's important as you're recruiting to be very clear and honest about your expectations. Oftentimes, I've found that boards will try to minimize their expectations because they don't want to scare anyone away, right? They want to say hey, we're great, come join us. Cool, great. But also be realistic. Let people know what the expectations are so that when they come to you for a board meeting, their eyes are open, they know what to expect. If you don't currently have an onboarding process in place, I encourage you to create one. I've served on boards where there has been no onboarding process in place, and I've served on boards where there is a robust onboarding process in place. And I have to tell you, I'm a much better board member when I have some onboarding, when I have some training, where I get some background around the organization and I understand its history, and I can really read through, minutes and bylaws and financial statements, right? Give as much information as you can to prospective board members so that they come in ready to work. If you're struggling finding board members, shameless plug, Leaders on Board can help you. We help you find people in the community who are trained and looking to join a board. So file that away. We are here to support you if you are looking for additional board members. The ninth responsibility is around legal and ethical integrity. And I always want to preface this by saying you don't have to be a nonprofit attorney to meet the standards of this particular responsibility. Again, eyes wide open. Right? We used to have an attorney who would do a portion of our training for Leaders on Board, and they would say, you don't have to be the sharpest tool in the shed, but you can't be asleep at the wheel. And I always thought that was a pretty good way to look at it, right? You don't have to be an expert in nonprofit law, but you do need to pay attention to all of these responsibilities, including this one. Most respected organizations tend to exceed the minimum standards related to compliance, transparency, and accountability. All organizations have to abide by the rules and the laws. Board directors have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that organizations are in full compliance of their legal obligations. Board members need to behave in a truthful, ethical manner. They need to exhibit due diligence to keep their house in order. So we want to be transparent. You can provide accurate information, but not share confidential information about the organization. If you find that you are in a position where there is some kind of legal question, there's something that you don't understand, or I was part of an organization where we had to merge, which is a whole complicated legal situation. There are great resources in our community that can help you. So some of you may have already heard about the Pro Bono Partnership. Pro Bono Partnership is an organization based here in Hartford that supports nonprofits when they have legal challenges or they have legal questions, they need to rework their bylaws, they need to merge, etc. And they will partner you with experts in our community who know exactly what needs to be done. They work directly with your board. They work directly with you to be sure that everything is taken care of, that you are in good hands, and it is really at a fraction of the cost that you would pay other attorneys. So keep that in mind. Pro Bono Partnership is wonderful. Before I move on to the last responsibility, are there any questions?
Not at this time. I have been keeping up and just sending links along in the chat around Leaders on Board, just in case you're not monitoring the chat.
Awesome.
I put in links for Leaders on Board and also the Pro Bono Partnership, as well as Board Source when you mentioned that, May.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for that. So I encourage you to look at a few of these documents if you haven't already. So your articles of incorporation is your founding document. It has good historical information. It may be of interest to you to see the original mission statement and get some of that historical information. You will also, if you are already familiar with the organization's bylaws, I encourage you to review them, to look at them. These are the legal operating guidelines of a board. I sat on a board once where a guy brought his bylaws to every single meeting, but they were always in a sealed envelope. I was like, well, let's just open the envelope, like just pretend you've read them, right? But lots of really good information is in your bylaws. Bylaws don't need to be full of legalese, right? It can be written plainly so that people can understand what the expectations are, what quorums are, how many people need to serve on the board, what your maximum number is, what your minimum number is, right? All that good information is super, super helpful. Code of conduct, provides guidelines for making ethical choices and ensuring accountability for those choices. It expresses commitment to ethical behavior. Do you have a conflict of interest policy? This is particularly important because it prevents board members from benefiting in any way from board service. The policy requires that those with a conflict or who think they may have a conflict disclose that information and prohibits individuals from voting on any matter where there is conflict. So conflict of interest comes up all the time. There was one group that we worked with years ago whose board chair was married to the executive director. Right? That's a conflict of interest. How can you assess your spouse's performance? How can you talk about pay? Right? That's a conflict of interest. So the board member, the spouse, needed to recuse themselves from those types of conversations, and all of that needed to be recorded in the minutes. It was handled appropriately, but conflict of interest does crop up a lot. The last responsibility is my favorite. And this is a reminder that as a board member, you are the PR team, you are the cheerleader, you are the logo of this organization. Who can you introduce the organization to in your network, your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors, who would be interested in the work? How can you talk about the organization in a way that is inspiring and meaningful? There are 12,000 nonprofits in Connecticut. What separates yours? How is it different? Why is it needed? You bring your entire self into the organization. So what are the perspectives that are unique to you? How can that enhance the organization? How can you enhance the organization and the communities that you are a part of? There was a few years ago, we were working with an organization that was an environmental group. And for some reason, they had developed a bit of a reputation of being tree huggers. And they, as a board, had to think about, how could they change that narrative and say, actually, these are the things that we do. We protect green spaces, and this is what we've done, and this is why we're important. And we're not tree huggers, right? We actually do some really interesting things. Learn about us, right? So know how you as a board want to talk about the organization. Being a board member is a privilege. It is an honor. It is your chance to advocate from a leadership perspective for work that you really care about. So think about who you can talk to, who you can celebrate the work with, who you can connect to the organization. I remember one year I invited a girlfriend of mine to come with me to a fundraiser for a board that I was serving with, and she didn't really know much about the organization, and she was interested to understand a little bit more about it. And come the holiday time, she and her family decided that they weren't going to exchange gifts, but rather they were going to make one donation to a nonprofit. And they were saying, geez, I don't know what nonprofit to give to. There's so many. And she said, well, I know one. I was at their event and it was really cool, and here's what they do. And so they donated a very generous gift to this organization. If she hadn't come to the fundraiser, she probably wouldn't have known enough about the organization to even put it on her short list of places to donate. So always be thinking about ways that you can connect and celebrate the work of the organization. So let's pause here. We've been at this for about an hour. So let's take, how about an 8-minute break? If you could be back here for 12:05, we will pick up and have you out by 1:30. So far we've talked about the role of the governing body, the full board. So I think it's important to remember that the full board has the agency, has the authority to make decisions on behalf of the organization. You as the individual board member do not. So May alone cannot pass a budget. The full board has the authority to do so. Over the next few slides, we're going to talk about the individual board member responsibilities. And these are very similar to the full board expectations that we reviewed just a moment ago. But I think it's important to think about ourselves as individual board members who are part of a larger governing body, the board. So there are 3 legal duties that are part of being a board member. They're called the 3 duties, or the 3 Ds, and all board members must meet certain standards of conduct and pay attention to these 3 rules. So these are the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. The first, the duty of care, is to, again, pay attention, ask questions, consider how would an ordinary, prudent person act in a similar situation. So say your organization gets a $10,000 grant and you are like, I am just on fire at Mohegan Sun. I know I can take this $10,000 and I can double it. Oh my God, I'm going to do it. That's not the way an ordinary prudent person would respond, right? That would not be a duty of care, right? That would be in violation. The duty of loyalty asks that you put the organization's interests above your own personal or professional interests. There was an example I read about a few years ago on the West Coast. There was a domestic violence shelter whose board chair was an emergency room doctor. And he started to duplicate services of the domestic violence shelter at the hospital. And it wasn't to be in partnership with, it wasn't to collaborate with the domestic violence shelter. The hospital actually became a direct competitor, right? So the duty of loyalty asks that you put the organization ahead of your own personal or professional goals. This particular doctor was in violation of the duty of loyalty. And then the last is the duty of obedience. And this requires us to make sure the organization is following the law, following its bylaws, using donated funds as intended, remain faithful guardians of that mission, paying attention, making sure that the organization is complying with laws, with bylaws, and doing everything they can to be above board. So when we're recruiting new board members through our Leaders on Board program, people will always say, how long are board meetings? What's the expectation? Obviously, that's going to depend on every single organization. Some boards meet monthly, some meet every other month, some meet quarterly. You as a board need to determine what is the best schedule for you. The message that I always try to convey when we're training people in board governance is, in addition to meetings, you also want to build in time to prepare for meetings. So I'm on a board. We have our annual meeting tonight, and they have sent out a dozen documents that need to be reviewed before our 4 o'clock meeting. So that takes time, right? So meetings are certainly an important part of being a board member, but preparing for those meetings, to review the minutes, to look at the financial statements, to look at all of the materials that are sent in advance is so important, so that when you come to the meeting, it can be as productive as possible. There's nothing worse than when people ask questions that have been clearly outlined in the materials. The board meeting is best when people come prepared, they're engaged, and they are ready to grapple with some challenges, to make some decisions, not have to sort of revisit information that has been previously shared. Does your organization have committees? Committees, again, they're a subset of the board. So folks that are particularly interested or have a skill set in finance or fundraising, event planning, can be on these committees. A committee needs to have at least one board member, but then other community members can be on those committees. And this is a great way to source new board members. You can invite folks to serve on a committee for a period of time before you determine if you want them to be on your board. But it's also a way for you to develop some new skills. So if you are somebody who's never had the opportunity to run events before, but you're interested in that as a learning opportunity, you might want to join the events committee. You can really pioneer and lead some ideas and initiatives around events. If you have a fundraising committee or a finance committee on your board and you're not currently part of that committee, that does not excuse you from fundraising or from paying attention to the finances of the organization. It just means that people who are on those committees are the most excited, the most fired up, the ones who are going to pioneer and lead initiatives, but the full board still needs to pay attention to all of those kinds of activities. You want to keep your eyes and your ears open. You want to pay attention to the reputation in the community. What do people know about the organization? What's the word on the street, right? What reputation does the organization have? Bring that into the board meeting so you can talk about it. Do you need to adjust your public image, right? Are you tree huggers, right? What are the things that you can do to change some of those narratives? Suggest agenda items, right? It's not exclusively up to the board chair and the executive director to come up with the agendas, right? If there's something that you're interested in and want to talk about, suggest it. You own the board meetings too, right? This needs to be time that is useful for you, and you want this to be as important as possible. I encourage you also to think about what it is that you want to get from this experience. right? So we ask you to donate your time, your talent, your treasure. You're giving a lot to this organization. What is it that you want to get from this experience? What are the skills that you want to learn? Who do you want to connect with? Who are the people in the room that you can learn something from? What leadership skills can you exercise? What muscles can you grow? And be very clear about what those expectations are, what those hopes are, so that your board can support you as you move along. So again, we've talked about a bit about these already. You want to pay attention to the organization's mission, the goals, the purposes, the policies, programs, services. Hopefully you can take on some leadership roles. So whether you're chairing a committee or you're on the executive committee, are you serving as chair, vice chair, treasurer, secretary? Are there ways that you can exercise some new leadership muscles, try different things? What's the reputation in the community? What are the trends in the field? Are you noticing that similar organizations to yours are folding during COVID? Are they expanding during the pandemic? Right? Pay attention to the organizations in your community that are similar to you. Are there ways to collaborate? Are there ways to exchange information? Are there opportunities for you to come together and build stronger as you come through this pandemic? The relationship with staff is an area that boards can sometimes get stuck. It can be kind of murky. So the board provides strategic goal setting. They watch the organization from 10,000 feet. If you have staff will do the day-to-day operations. Of course, if there's no staff, you're going to do both. But remember, for organizations that have paid staff, as a board member, your primary contract is going to be with the executive director. Her role is to manage the rest of the staff. We're all on the same team. So our goal is to cultivate trust and candor and respect for one another. So we have a couple of scenarios. I think we have time for one of them. Yeah, let's do one of them. And I'm going to read the scenario, and then I'm going to ask you to think, based on what we discussed today, what would you do? And I'll invite you to take yourself off mute and offer some of your ideas. So this is a common issue facing nonprofit boards. It's around decreased funding. I suspect everyone on this call has had something like this happen in for your organization. So your board is concerned about a significant decrease in the amount of funding that the state will be providing for your organization's services. The board expects revenues to decrease by about 30% in the coming fiscal year and is considering what action to take. What actions might a board take in an organization with a paid executive director and staff? What do you think? What would you do? Or if you're part of an organization that does not have paid staff and you're an all-volunteer organization, what would you do? You can answer one or both of these questions. Any brave souls? Feel free to unmute. This is a judgment-free zone.
We have a comment from Brittany. If paid, may ask board to increase contributions.
Sure. Why only if paid? If there's paid staff? Brittany? Brittany, would you mind telling us a little more about what you have in mind?
So she followed it up with, in either case, board will need to have fundraising programs in place.
Oh, thank you, Brittany. Perfect. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Great.
And then Ellen shared, look to cut expenses.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So my only word of caution around that is the executive director, if you have one, would be the one to think about what to cut, right? They're the ones day to day managing the operations of the organization. They would be the ones to determine if someone needs to be moved to part-time or somebody needs to be let go or a program needs to retire, right? So that's where it gets murky. If you're part of an all volunteer-led organization, that would absolutely be a function of the full board. But know that if there's staff in place, it just gets a little bit more gray in terms of who does what. You might want to identify a committee where you can look for some new funding sources, where you can create a new fundraiser. You would work very closely with your executive director if you have one around different ideas, but ultimately the executive director would be the one to determine if there could be cuts.
Right. Some other comments around maybe look for other grants to apply for,
Yep.
research grants that help offset the loss, and then seek donations.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Think about your sphere, right? We talked about how important those that we know are in terms of the health and vitality of our organization. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. We'll skip the second one for now, and I just want to point a couple of resources out before we close. So being a board member is a complex matrix of funneling your passion and love for the work with some very practical logistical responsibilities. There are a lot of resources available to you, many of which are for free. So here is a bunch of resources that we've compiled. This is in no way complete, but know that there are resources for you if you're on a board and you're like, yeah, I got some questions, I'm not really sure. Board Source is certainly one. So the 10 basic roles and responsibilities that we talked about today, that was drawn from Board Source. Again, you can get a membership and you can access all of their tools, all of their templates, all of their tutorials. You can also access some at no cost without having a membership. So definitely put a star next to that. The Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, how we're all here today. Obviously, they have a tremendous number of programs and support services for nonprofits, small nonprofits in particular, really nonprofits of all sizes. Leadership Greater Hartford, we are here. Leaders on Board is here. If you find that you are looking for additional board members and you're struggling to diversify your boards, consider coming to Leaders on Board. We train folks in board governance and then facilitate speed dating events. They're called express matches, where you can meet a bunch of different candidates who are trained, who've already raised their hand and said, yes, I'm interested in serving on a board. I just don't have the right fit yet. And you'll get to talk with them and share, what it is that your organization does, why it matters in the community, what skills you're looking for from board members, what challenges you're experiencing, and you can get recruits that way. You can find new folks that you maybe wouldn't have had an audience with prior to this speed dating event. So it's a fun way to connect with folks outside of your network. And again, they're all trained. They're all looking for the right home. So keep that in mind. And then Pro Bono Partnership, we did talk about them a bit, but again, just to underscore that they are a resource if you have any legal challenges, questions, concerns. They are fantastic, and they're based here in Hartford. So let's pause and see if anyone has any questions. If not, I'll turn it over to Yvette.
First, I just want to note, Anne shared all volunteer if property, just in terms of the scenario, if property owners such as local historic property consider short-term equity loan, connect with key donors, ask for special donations, look for short-term grants, just to kind of round out some options, really thinking outside the box, if you will.
Yeah.
We do have a request just to see if we could share your email address, May.
Sure.
If you want to drop that in the chat, that'd be great. While I close this out, some asked also if we're going to get these materials. Absolutely, you're going to get the PowerPoint and the recording link sent to your email, along with, and I know Betsy's probably dropping the survey in the chat as we speak. But we will send you the survey link as well to have your thoughts expressed there. On behalf of our team at the Hartford Foundation, at the Hartford Public Library, really just join me in thanking you, May, for always presenting clearly and what could be a very complex topic. Just thank you again for being our presenter today. Thank you all for attending. I really appreciate our consistent frequent flyers. Please, every time you come, I'm hoping you're taking away something different, something new to take back to your organizations. Your work is essential and we appreciate it. Again, look out for your email. You'll get the slide deck and the recording and the link to the survey. And keep looking at our nonprofit workshop page at the Hartford Public Library. We haven't posted our 2022 schedule yet, but that should be coming up shortly. So keep an eye out for other sessions. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a beautiful
everybody.
day.
Happy holidays, everyone.